Welcome to Jazz Piano Skills. I'm Dr. Bob Lawrence. It's time to discover, learn, and play jazz piano. Well, we devoted the month of May to exploring the primary sounds of music, major, dominant, minor, half diminished, and diminished, in relation to A-flat. In other words, the A-flat sounds. And not only the primary A-flat sounds, right, major, dominant, minor, half diminished, and diminished, but the altered A-flat sounds as well. Now, we've been doing this all year, right? We used 5 specific melodic patterns to focus on developing mobile fingerings that allow our hand, our right hand, to be in a constant state of movement across the keys. Why the constant state of movement? Why is that so important? Why the shifting of the hand? Because by constantly moving and positioning our right hand, we are seeking optimal finger usage needed to produce a strong and an authentic jazz articulation. And of course, making sure that we never run out of fingers in the middle of a musical phrase as well. Now, we have utilized this intentional approach for the primary and altered sounds, like I said, since the beginning of the year. And we're going to continue doing so for the entire year through all of the various keys, the notes. So today, we will follow that exact same format that we used in May with A-flat and that we've followed since the start of the year with C, F, B-flat, and E-flat. We're going to do that today, however, with the primary sounds of music centered around the note D-flat, or in some cases, C-sharp. So today, you're going to discover essential jazz improvisation exercises. And you are going to learn developmental arpeggio and scale patterns of D-flat, C-sharp sounds. And you're going to play 5 arpeggio and scale patterns, 5 arpeggio and 5 scale patterns, focusing on fingerings and articulation for the primary D-flat, C-sharp sounds of music, major, dominant, minor, half diminished, and diminished. So, as I always like to say, regardless of where you are in your jazz journey, a beginner, an intermediate player, an advanced player, or even if you are a seasoned and experienced professional, you're going to find this Jazz Piano Skills podcast lesson exploring jazz improvisation exercises for D-flat, C-sharp sounds to be very beneficial. But before we dig in, I want to, as I always do, I want to welcome new listeners. And if you are indeed a new listener to the Jazz Piano Skills podcast, if you are new to Jazz Piano Skills, I want to personally invite you to become a Jazz Piano Skills member. Now, there are several membership plans to choose from, so check out jazzpianoskills.com to learn more about each of the plans and all of the perks of each membership level. There are educational weekly podcast packets, the illustrations, lead sheets, play-alongs. There's a sequential jazz piano curriculum, which is loaded with comprehensive courses, online weekly masterclasses, online interactive fake book, and a private jazz piano skills community hosting a variety of engaging forums. There's unlimited private, personal, and professional educational support on top of all that as well. So all of these perks are waiting for you, waiting to help you discover, learn, and play jazz piano. So check it out at jazzpianoskills.com. And of course, become a member. If you have any questions, once you're there, if you have any questions about the membership or any of the perks, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. I'm always happy to spend some time with you, answer any questions that you may have, and help you in any way that I can. Okay, on to the question of the week. I received this email from Jim Moen. Jim Moen, living in Watertown, South Dakota. And Jim reached out to say, I am relatively new to jazz, and I've worked up the courage to begin to attempt to learn how to improvise. So far, I've struggled with playing anything that sounds good to my ears. I'm not asking for a shortcut, but wondering if there is an easy way to begin this process, to begin learning how to improvise. Again, no shortcut, just want to speed up the process a little. All right. Well, great question, Jim, and congrats. You've taken the most challenging step, starting the journey of developing improvisational skills. I say journey because that is exactly what it is. It's a lifelong endeavor that you will continue to explore, to experience, and refine forever. Okay. So we are all on this journey together. Some of us a little further down the road than others, but we are all students of improvisation, which is exactly why I love it. There is always something to discover, something to learn, something to play forever. So with that being said, allow me to take a few minutes to try to unpack a game plan for you and for all listeners, regardless of where you find yourself on the developmental improvisational road. To begin, when practicing improvisation, which, by the way, always involves taking musical risks, you will play what I like to call the good, the bad, and the ugly. This is something we all need to embrace and realize that this is part of the process that will never, ever change, regardless of our experience. So, Jim, do not be discouraged in the least when you play the bad and the ugly. After all, you're not excused from experiencing the trauma that we all have to go through when practicing improvisation, right? We all experience it. Now, the timing of your question is perfect. My podcast episode last week was called Chunks, Shapes, and Sounds. It presented a bottom-up approach to applying a top-down understanding of how jazz improvisation works. So let me take a minute to explain the top-down conceptual understanding of improvisation that you want to have sorted out as soon as possible. Here it is. Number one, music is all about the production of sound. Right? It's an oral art form. It's not a visual art form. Number two, there are 5 primary sounds found in music: major, dominant, minor, half diminished, and diminished. Number 3, the primary sounds can be played harmonically and melodically. Harmonically as chords, melodically scales and arpeggios. Number 4, melodic sound, scales and arpeggios, can be played using 2 motions: ascending motion and descending motion. Number 5, rhythm is then applied to melodic and harmonic sound to create musical interest, songs, compositions, or improvisation, spontaneous composition. That's it. That is how music works. That is how jazz works. That is how improvisation works. If you have a command of this truth, this outline that I just laid out, if you have a command of this truth intellectually, then the bottom-up approach I am going to tell you about, that I'm going to tell you to begin using when developing improvisation skills, will make a ton of sense. It is also important to realize that melody flows from harmony. Melody flows from harmony. So in other words, the stronger your understanding of harmony, harmonic shapes, the easier it will be to create melodies, whether those melodies are composed or improvised. So in last week's podcast episode, I discussed the most petite, the smallest harmonic shape in music, the major and minor third. I called them chunks. And this is precisely, Jim, where I would encourage you to begin your improvisation journey with these chunks. Start with the root and the third of each of the primary sounds. So for example, using the primary sounds of C, you would begin improvising with the notes C and E, the root and third of the C major and C dominant sounds, and the notes C and E flat, the root and third of the C minor, half diminished, and diminished sounds. Begin by applying various rhythmic patterns to the root and third of each of the primary sounds. Now, I modeled this approach in last week's podcast episode, so be sure to check it out. Now, what I love about this approach, what I absolutely love about this approach, is that not only does it help you comfortably approach improvising in a non-intimidating way, but it also, by default, forces you to automatically begin incorporating the two most important traits, characteristics, laced throughout every great jazz solo. Those two important traits: space, silence, and repetition. You have to use space and repetition, right? You have to, because you only have two notes. You have two notes to use, so you have to lean on creating musical interest by injecting space and repetition into the rhythms that you are using when playing the two notes. Wow. If you want to sound like a pro right away, start with musical chunks, rhythms, which force you to utilize space and repetition. So, Jim, once you are comfy with the root and third of the sound, then begin exploring the third and the fifth, and then the fifth and the seventh. Use the same approach regardless of the chunk you are exploring. The other thing I like about this approach is that it shields you from having to worry about chord scale relationships, modes, passing tones, approach tones, and everything else that you simply should not be worrying about when starting out on your improvisation journey. Again, your timing, the timing of your question is perfect. And I would strongly recommend listening to last week's podcast episode, Chunks, Shapes, and Sounds, to gain a deeper understanding of this approach. Wow. As always, another great question from another wonderful Jazz Piano Skills member. Now, Jim, if further clarification is needed, or if you just have some follow-up questions, then please let me know. Always happy to help you in any way that I can. Okay, onward with our exploration of jazz improvisation exercises for D-flat, C-sharp sounds. Wow, did you all hear the thunder and the lightning? I guess we're in the middle of a incredible thunderstorm here in Dallas, so I'm glad I'm inside, safe and sound, and talking about jazz piano. So let's talk about fingerings for a second. You know, I've brought this up before, that in all my experience in teaching, the number one reason people have difficulty playing the piano, right? It's not due to a lack of talent, a lack of skill. It's not due to a lack of motivation or even a lack of time practicing. I find that the greatest challenge, the greatest hurdle for people to jump is the development of mobility, hand mobility, finger mobility, right? It's almost like a hand paralysis that makes it difficult for students to generate melodic lines, to play the piano musically, right? Now, scale and arpeggio practice is, of course, a great way to begin developing hand mobility. However, as I have mentioned, melodies do not just simply ascend and descend in a straight line like we practice scales. Therefore, it's important to begin practicing patterns, melodic patterns, like the ones that we've been exploring since the start of the year. Now, that challenge, right? The challenge in doing these patterns is to begin developing hand mobility, to begin this feeling of shifting our hands across the keys. All right. So by practicing intentional hand shifts that are built into these patterns, we begin to simulate a musical reality that pianists must deal with when playing. Now, this musical reality, the need to always have fingers available, allowing us to move in either direction, up or down, must be practiced in such a way that it develops proper musical instincts and muscle memory. Musical instincts and muscle memory that allow us to properly articulate melodies so that they sound, right? The whole point is so that they sound like jazz. Now, this is precisely why the melodic patterns that we are exploring today and have been throughout the year focus on intentionally creating these hand shifts within a melodic line. Even if it's possible to play the melodic line with no hand shift, right, we are intentionally inserting hand shifts. The objective, again, is to begin establishing and developing this finger mobility. In fact, some of the fingerings that I've notated in the lead sheets in these patterns have multiple hand shifts within one measure of music, right? So throughout this year, as I mentioned, we are devoting our effort to exploring 5 primary sounds of music for all 12 notes using arpeggio and scale patterns, improvisation exercises that will force us to deal with fingerings to develop hand mobility. And we are also utilizing the same approach to explore the altered sounds, flat 9, sharp 11, flat 5, sharp 5, flat 13, right? Each month we focus on one of the 12 notes. One week of the month we devote to the primary sounds. Another week we devote to the altered sounds. Then we follow it all up with a bebop tune to help us apply our new fingerings to a musical setting. So the agenda for today, the educational agenda for today is as follows. Number 1, we begin our jazz improvisation exercises for D-flat, C-sharp sounds. Number 2, we will play essential arpeggio patterns you need to discover, learn, and play. From the root to the 13th of the sound, using a root, 3rd, 5th, and 7th entry. Number 3, we will play essential scale patterns that you need to discover, learn, and play. From the root to the 13th of the sound, once again, using a root, 3rd, 5th, and 7th entry. And number 4, I will be playing all jazz improvisation exercises today using the minor sound. And number 5, I will be playing those minor sounds, the jazz improvisation exercises for the minor sound, using a traditional swing groove of 110. Now, if you are a Jazz Piano Skills member, I want you to take a few minutes right now to download and print your podcast packet. So hit the pause button, access your illustrations, your lead sheets, and your play-alongs. And again, your membership grants you access to all of the podcast packets for every weekly podcast episode. And as I mention every week, you should be using these podcast packets when listening to the episode. And of course, you should be using them when practicing as well. So if you are listening to this podcast on any of the popular podcast directories, such as Apple or Google, Amazon, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, the list goes on and on, then be sure to go directly to jazzpianoskillspodcast.com. That's jazzpianoskillspodcast.com to access, download your podcast package. And you will find the active download links within the show notes. One final but very significant message that I include in every podcast. If you are sitting here and listening and thinking that the Jazz Improvisation Exercises for D flat, C sharp, you're thinking that these exercises and the various scales that we are about to discover, learn, and play are over your head, then I would say to you, no worries. Sit back, relax, right? Just continue to listen and grow your jazz piano skills intellectually by simply listening. Every new skill that we tackle is technically over our heads when introduced. But this is how we get better, right? We place ourselves smack dab in the middle of conversations where we're hearing words, we're hearing things that we've never heard before, words that we've never heard before, and we're forced to grow intellectually. I say it all the time. All musical growth begins upstairs, mentally, conceptually, before it can come out downstairs physically in your hands. So sit back, listen to this podcast lesson now to discover and learn. The play, as it always does, will come in time. Okay, now that you have your lead sheets in your hands, I want to point out a few things. You will see that lead sheets 1 through 5 deal with arpeggio motion. Lead sheets 6 through 10 deal with scale motion. Now, you'll also notice that the jazz improvisation exercises are the same for all 5 primary sounds, for the major, dominant, minor, half diminished, and diminished. The exercises are, of course, modified to reflect the proper sound. And you'll also notice that my suggested fingerings are included for every note of every exercise for every sound. And of course, you can, as I've mentioned before, you can modify the fingerings slightly, right? But be careful. Remember, the fingerings have hand shifts built into them intentionally. So if you're thinking, wait a minute, I can just remove this hand shift and make it easier, you're missing the point, right? So just be careful. We do not want to be taking hand shifts out. You can always add them. That'd be great. But we do not want to be taking them out, right? And the fingerings, the specific fingerings, is what allows us to play with a proper jazz articulation. So again, you may be inclined to change the fingerings. You may. Be careful. But just keep in mind, too, that your easier may actually end up making it harder, right? So I'm just throwing that out there. It's just a little bit of caution. Just be careful. Okay, so let's dig in. Grab lead sheet 3, skill 3. Okay, this is arpeggio patterns for C sharp minor. Right? I've been saying D flat all along, but here we go. C sharp minor. Now, I've done this intentionally because I'm hoping that we can just talk about this briefly. Every chord comes from somewhere, right? So minor sounds are found within the major scale, produced by the major scale, the 2nd degree, the 3rd degree, and 6th degree of the scale. Right? So if we take a look at the note D flat or C sharp, and we ask ourselves a question, what scale does that come from? That note comes from the B major scale. B major is a sharp key. Therefore, we should refer to this note as C sharp, not D flat. If we pretend that this note D flat or C sharp is functioning as a 3, that means it would be coming from the key of A. again, A is a sharp key. So therefore, we should refer to it as C sharp minor, not D flat minor. Now let's pretend that this note C sharp, D flat or C sharp, is the 6th degree of the scale. If it's the 6th degree of the scale, it means it comes from the key of E. Once again, key of E is a sharp key. So therefore, it's appropriate for us to refer to it as C sharp, not D flat. So theoretically speaking, D flat minor simply does not exist. C sharp minor does because it comes from either the key of B, the key of A, or the key of E. All three sharp keys. So no matter how you look at it, its origin, where it's coming from a sharp key. So therefore, my minor sounds here today are all referred to as C sharp minor. Hope that helps. And I will be treating this C sharp minor as if it is coming from the key of B major. B major. So if you look at the key signature here on your lead sheet, you'll see 5 sharps. So I'm treating these patterns today as if this C sharp minor belongs to the key of B major. Okay, so let's take a look at pattern number 1, letter A. Simple 4-note arpeggio with a root entry, and then a 3rd entry, a 5th entry, and a 7th entry. So our root entry goes from the root to the 7th. Our 3rd entry from the 3rd to the 9th. Our 5th entry from the 5th to the 11th. And then the 7th entry from the 7th to the 13th. Okay, so we're exploring the entire C sharp minor sound from the root to the 13th. Each one of these arpeggios, you'll notice the fingerings again, each one of these arpeggios has an intentional hand shift built into the fingerings, right? So this is what I was talking about earlier. Don't change the fingering to take the hand shift out. All right, we want this shift in here even though we're only playing a 4-note arpeggio. Okay, we want to get used to moving our hands, right? Hand mobility is what we're after. So let's bring the ensemble in. I'm going to play through each of these patterns, each of these arpeggios 4 times. I'll start off 4 measures up at the top, just kind of getting into the feel, swing feel at 110. Then I will start playing pattern number 1 there with the root entry 4 times, then to the 3rd entry 4 times, and so on. Okay? So let's bring the ensemble in and let's take a listen to pattern 1, letter A. Here we go. Nice, right? Great little exercise to practice. I love it. Simple arpeggio, focusing on a nice articulation, nice feel, nice fingerings, Nice movement from the root of the sound through the 13th of the sound. Now, pattern 2, letter B, expands that arpeggio just slightly, right? We create a little contour to the arpeggio. So now we get something that sounds like this. Right? But we're going to follow the same process. 3rd entry, 5th entry, 7th entry. From the root to the 13th. Okay? So, again, if you look at the fingerings carefully, you'll notice there's hand shifts in there. Okay? Forcing our hands to move across the piano. Even with these little motifs, we're still incorporating hand movement. All right, so let's bring the ensemble back in and let's listen to arpeggio movement from the root to the 13th of the sound for our C sharp minor. Here we go. Very nice. Now, letter C gets a little trickier intentionally, right? Still again, root, 3rd, 5th, 7th entry. But now our hands, we have these interval leaps. You'll see like in pattern 1, we're moving from the C sharp to the G sharp, from the E to the B. We have these fifths. And I can think of no better way to play these motifs than with the fingerings that I'm using there, that I'm notating there, right? We're moving that thumb from the root to the 3rd, literally moving the hand across the keys. Okay, and the same thing, same fingering for the 3rd. Check it out, for the 5th and for the 7th. Really focusing on moving the hand and moving that thumb. All right, so let's bring the ensemble in and let's check out letter C. Here we go. doesn't get any easier, right? Because take a peek at letter D. We've been dealing with eighth note triplets for a long time. We dealt with them all last year with our rhythmic exercises. Here we have the eighth note triplets in here now. Our melodic line is getting a little longer, you notice, right? But we have these eighth note triplets. Therefore, again, I'm playing everything at 110 today. I mention it every week, every month. Of course, begin practicing these patterns, especially with the new shapes, new keys at slower tempos, right? 60, 70, 80, especially letter D here with these triplets, right? Not easy. Of course, the hand shifts will make it a lot easier, but nevertheless, not easy. So again, we follow the same format. We have a root entry, third entry, fifth, seventh, exploring the entire minor sound from the root all the way through the 13th of the sound. So let's bring the ensemble in. Let's see and let's hear how these eighth note triplet sound using these fingerings. Here we go. Let's check it out. Challenging indeed. So, okay, now we're down to our last arpeggio exercise today, exploring C sharp minor, letter E. You can see that our melodic idea now is stretching over the bar line into measure 2, so we have a much longer melodic motif to deal with. We have quite a few hand shifts taking place in each one of these lines, so pay careful attention to the fingerings. Also, get comfortable with thumbs landing up there on the black notes. That's another dimension of these patterns, getting us, especially all of us who are trained classically, who have been avoiding the thumb on black notes for a long time, right? It's okay. It's going to feel feel fine, and it's okay. It works. So let's bring the ensemble in, and let's take a listen to letter E, our last arpeggio exercise today for C sharp minor. But again, root, third, fifth, seventh entry, so that we explore the entire sound from the root all the way to the 13th. So here we go. Check it out. on to scale movement next. So we need to grab lead sheet 8, scale 8. And here again, we have C sharp minor 7 that we're dealing with, treating it as the 2 chord coming from the key of B major. And pattern 1, or letter A, starts with our root entry and plays the scale literally from the root to the 7th, then the 3rd entry to the 9th, 5th entry to the 11th, and then the 7th entry to the 13th. Pretty straightforward, just like we did the arpeggios. Root to 7, 3rd to 9, 5th to 11th, 7th to 13th, ascending motion through the entire C sharp minor sound. We're going to do the exact same thing with the scale. So now let's bring the ensemble in and let's listen to letter A, pattern 1, C sharp minor 7. Here we go. Very nice. Letter A, pattern 1 of the scale movement. Letter A, pattern 1 of the arpeggio movement. Probably the 2 most important exercises that you'll do, right? Once you get those under your hands, then patterns 2 through 5 become a whole lot easier. So, speaking of pattern 2, let's look at letter B. We have our C sharp minor again, root to 13th. Our entry points, root 3rd, 5th, and 7th. We add a little contour now to our scale motion, so we get something that sounds like this. Right, but we have our hand shifts in there that we need to deal with. So pay attention to the fingerings, right? Pay attention to the fingerings and make sure that you are playing with a nice legato feel, even with the hand shifts, okay? So let's bring the ensemble in. Let's listen to letter B, pattern number 2. Here we go. to pattern 3, letter C. We dealt with eighth note triplets with our arpeggio motion, so of course we're going to deal with eighth note triplets with our scale movement. It's a little tricky here. Our line gets extended into the second measure. Our motifs are getting longer now. And of course we have these triplets to deal with as well as our hand shifts, right? Right? So again, I'm playing at 110 just for the sake of time here in this podcast episode. But certainly with these eighth note triplets, feel free to lower that tempo, 60, 70, 80, right? Create a tempo, select a tempo that's going to allow you to succeed with these rhythms before you begin increasing the tempo, okay? So with letter C, we follow the same format that we've been doing all day. Root entry, third, fifth, and seventh entry. Exploring the entire C sharp minor sound from the root to the 13th. So let's bring the ensemble back in and let's check out these eighth note triplets. Here we go. Not easy at all, but certainly well worth the effort to stick with these fingerings and to stick with these patterns. They will pay huge dividends for you. So now let's take a look at letter D, pattern 4. We're back to straight eighth note movement. Our melodic idea, again, though, stretches into the second measure. We have root, third, fifth, and seventh entry, as always. Quite a few hand shifts taking place within each one of these motifs, so pay careful attention to the fingerings. And once again, as always, even though these are not eighth note triplets, feel free to play at slower tempos, right? So, and in your left hand, I have not mentioned this, in your left hand, feel free to use any voicing that you would like. You can use a traditional block voicing, you can use a 3-note traditional shell, a contemporary shell in the left hand, or you know what? You don't need to use a shell at all. You don't need to play a voicing at all in the left hand. Focus on the right hand first, then add the voicing, any voicing in the left hand, okay? So let's bring the ensemble in. Let's check out pattern 4, letter D, C sharp minor, root to 13th. Here we go. are down to our final scale exercise for today, pattern for today. Pattern 5, letter E, C sharp minor. Our melodic line gets a little longer, but we're dealing with eighth notes again, ascending motion. And again, multiple finger shifting taking place, hand shifts taking place with our fingerings intentionally, right? We're trying to develop hand mobility with each one of these patterns, whether we're using arpeggio motion or scale motion. Hand mobility is the name of the game. So let's bring our ensemble in and let's take a listen to our very last pattern for today, letter E. Here we go. Well, as always, we have packed a ton of information into a very quick, very fast 1 hour episode. And again, even though I played these jazz improvisation exercises for you today using the minor sound, right, the minor sound, be sure to explore these patterns, these very same patterns for the major, for the dominant, for the half diminished and the diminished sounds as well. They are all laid out for you in your Lead Sheets podcast packets with fingerings included. And remember, you may make some modifications to the fingerings to best fit your hand, but just be careful, right? Whatever fingerings you choose, make sure that you are not removing hand shifts in the fingerings, because that's the whole objective of these exercises. And make sure that the fingerings allow you to play with a proper jazz articulation through the entire sound, whether you're launching from the root or the third or the fifth or the seventh, right? Remember, the articulation of each musical phrase, regardless of the entry point, should sound the same. Wow, you have a ton to tackle this week with these primary sounds for D flat and C sharp. Next week, of course, we will be jumping into exercises dealing with the D flat altered sounds. Okay? So once again, I want to encourage all you Jazz Piano Skills members, make sure to use your podcast packets. The illustrations are invaluable tools to help you digest this information conceptually, right? Which will make the playing so much easier. You got your lead sheets, you got your fingerings. There are play-along files for you to tap into as well. These are educational tools that will help you gain a mastery of these jazz piano skills conceptually, physically, and of course, musically. Most importantly, be patient. Developing mature and professional jazz piano skills takes time, takes a long time. So begin structuring your improvisation development. You're practicing after the playing demonstrations that I've modeled for you today with C sharp minor, and I guarantee it, you will begin to see, you will begin to feel and hear your progress. Well, I hope you have found this Jazz Piano Skills podcast lesson, exploring jazz improvisation exercises for D-flat, C-sharp sounds, to be insightful and, of course, to be beneficial. Don't forget, if you are a Jazz Piano Skills Ensemble member, I will see you online Thursday evening at the Jazz Piano Skills Masterclass. It's going to be 8 p.m. Central Time to discuss this podcast episode lesson, exploring jazz improvisation exercises for D-flat, C-sharp in greater detail, and, of course, to answer any questions that you may have about the study of jazz in general. Wow. Okay. You can always reach me by phone at 972-380-8050. My extension here at the Dallas School of Music is 211. If you prefer email, my email address is drlawrence, drlawrence at jazzpianoskills.com. Or you can use that nifty little SpeakPipe widget. I always love getting SpeakPipes. SpeakPipe widget that is found throughout the entire Jazz Piano Skills website. In fact, I think there's practically a link on every web page of the site. Well, there is my cue. That's it for now. And until next week, enjoy the jazz improvisation exercises for the D-flat, C-sharp sounds. And most of all, have fun as you discover, learn, and play jazz piano.